this time period in my life with Ryland was so abnormal and out of whack of like how I normally am that it's crazy to me to even think about some of the things that I was doing or some of the things that I was thinking, because it was so like just weird for me.
You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, where you'll gain the knowledge and confidence you need to erase the unknowns of pregnancy and birth and rock the newborn days like a boss. My name is Liesel. I'm a fellow mom, labor and delivery nurse, and your host. Each week on this podcast, you'll hear a mix of birth stories, expert interviews, and other fun pregnancy and birth-related content. As a reminder, anything you hear on this podcast is not medical advice. Please see mommylabornurse.com/disclaimer for more details. And now let's get into this week's episode. Hey guys, happy Monday. So this week I have a cool episode. So if you guys have been following me on Instagram, I guess for a year now, it's been a year since my little baby was born, my little sweet 1-year-old Ryland. So I put out an episode, it was about 6 weeks postpartum, and just did kind of a postpartum update with him. And I mentioned in that episode that I wanted to do like a yearly update, when he's a year, just to see how the past year, has went. So that's what this episode is all about. So I had Tiffany come back on. If you guys have been listening to the podcast for a little while, you know who Tiffany is. She comes on every once in a while and is a co-host of mine and asks me questions, or we do, joint episodes together. So she came on and she asked me some questions. We had a really, really great conversation. She shared some stuff about her postpartum journey, and I've obviously talked about mine, but we talked about lots of different things. I talked about birth control. I talked about, my breastfeeding journey with him and starting formula. I talked about Ryland's allergies that he has and, how that all played into my breastfeeding journey. I talked about switching to cow's milk, which I just did. I talked about starting solids and sleep training him and my postpartum anxiety more. There was just a lot in this episode. So I know this episode is a little bit longer than our normal Mommy Labor Nurse episodes. But yeah, it's basically me recounting my whole past year of life because a lot of stuff happened. So let's get right into this week's episode. Are you in search of the perfect pump for the breastfeeding days? The Motif Medical Luna is a powerful breast pump built for modern motherhood and covered by insurance. Now battery powered to give you more freedom and flexibility. Luna's rechargeable battery lasts over 2 hours. It's also got a super simple setup and easy customization option, so you can quickly find out what works best for you and your baby. The Luna features a backlit LCD screen, built-in nightlight, closed system, quiet motor, and auto shutoff. It's also super lightweight, weighing in at just 2 pounds. But beyond the features and ease of use, the Luna works. In a third-party study, 5 out of 6 moms reported more milk and less time with Luna. One major reason why 90% surveyed preferred the Luna over their current pump. As a pumping mom, I personally used and loved my Luna pump. The massage and expression mode provides full control and maximum comfort. These modes stimulate letdown by mimicking your baby's natural nursing pattern and expresses milk from the breast with high efficiency. Sophisticated, strong, soothing, and covered by insurance. Get ready to make your pumping days easier with the Luna. To learn more about the Luna and order one for your breastfeeding and pumping journey, head on over to motifmedical.com. And now let's get into this week's episode. Hi, Tiffany. Welcome to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. Thanks so much for being here today. We have a cool episode, unique episode today. So for those who didn't listen to one that you've been on before, how many episodes have you been on with me? Like 4-ish?
Yeah, I think 4 or 5.
Can you just introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are?
Yep. So if you've not heard me on one of the previous podcasts, my name's Tiffany. I am a very good friend of Liesel's, but also an employee of Mommy Labor Nurse, and a labor and delivery nurse myself.
Cool. Yeah, I'm trying to think. So you did
two parts of your birth story. If you just go back and search Tiffany on mommylabornurse.com, you'll probably get a whole, sling of the episodes that she's been on. But I did my birth story with Ryland. You were on that one. The postpartum one, was that 2 episodes? Feel like that was just one episode.
One of them was 2 episodes. I can't remember which of those was, but
maybe it was 2. I don't remember. So I guess that's 3. And then both of your birth stories and then the labor and delivery one that we did. So I guess it's 6.
Oh yeah. That's more than I remember.
I know. So you're basically like my fill-in co-host now. So I feel like people are starting to get to know you, but all right. So guys, I feel like, we talked about this maybe in the postpartum episode that we did almost a year ago. When did I record that? A month out, 6 weeks out?
It was right after your 6-week appointment.
I was going to say it was right after my 6-week appointment. So it's been almost a year since I've recorded that episode. And we said in that episode that we should do like a 1-year kind of update, postpartum update, breastfeeding update, just yearly life update. So that is what we're going to do today. I'm just going to kind of get candid with you guys and talk about the last year of my life with Ryland and Walter and Brian and me and just everything. So Tiffany's just kind of going to serve as my interviewer. So Tiffany, you want to start us off and I can just start talking about everything.
Yep. So we've just got a bunch of questions we're going to go through, and I'm going to try and structure it to start from where we left off at the 6-week postpartum visit and carry it all the way through 1 year. So let's first talk about birth control. I think we maybe talked about this during the 6-week postpartum visit, and I don't think you were getting on anything at that point, but has anything changed in that time?
Yeah. So I believe at that point, I still didn't really want to get on anything in terms of like long-term birth control. I knew I didn't want to do anything like permanent at that point, but our plans right now, like we're not planning on having another baby anytime soon. So I knew that at 6 weeks. I kind of knew that at 6 weeks. But I knew that at 6 weeks, but I just, wasn't even ready at that point to do like an IUD or anything. So we just kind of, held off on doing everything and did natural family planning and condoms, until I felt like, okay, maybe I want to get an IUD or, do something else. So the things that have changed are I did use that Ava bracelet for a little while when we were just kind of doing natural family planning. So I was wearing that and just trying to kind of, tracking my cycles. But really the main thing that has changed is I got an IUD placed about almost 3 months ago. And I don't even think I really shared it on my story, but I got an IUD placed and it was a really easy procedure. I was really not really nervous about it, but just, nervous, like in anticipation of what the procedure is going to be like, because I've heard, it can be painful and blah, 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 blah. So got it placed. It was like a little bit of cramping and it's been great. I mean, really, Tiffany knows this, but really the main thing that I've been complaining about is I've had quite a good amount of bleeding from it. But I know that can be within a realm of normal, for a certain point. So at this point, I kind of just plan on having it there as long as my bleeding gets under control. The first month I bled, like when I was due for my period, I bled for almost a whole month, just kind of on and off, not a heavy period every day, but something that I had to wear a tampon or have a pad on, all day. And so that was not fun the first month. And then the second month, it was about 2 or 2.5 weeks of same kind of bleeding where it wasn't like heavy clots, but I still had to wear something. So now, coming up on the 3rd month, I'm due for my period in about a week. So we'll see what this period's like. Hopefully it's going to, I'm hoping like, okay, the first one was the worst one. And then, okay, it's like 2.5 weeks of bleeding. And then maybe this next one is going to be like semi-normal period. And then maybe it'll start to get lighter and lighter. But overall, I mean, I've been happy with it. I haven't had any other symptoms other than the, abnormal bleeding, which can be normal. I know sometimes people get headaches with it or get nausea or, get other kind of symptoms. And I can't feel it at all during sex. Like my husband's never complained about it or anything. So that's my plan at this point. And I had really, really heavy periods before I got it placed. Not long, like afterwards, like not the extended amount of bleeding that I've had, but I've had like really heavy clotting and heavy bleeding. And so I know that is a symptom, that is a side effect of the IUD2s that I can help with that. So I'm hoping that the bleeding not only slows down, but it continues to be lighter. So
I think we should debunk some IUD myths real quick, because we were talking to my sister, who's actually a good friend of Liesel's, also a week or so ago, about IUDs and how all three of us have one. And we were like, what the heck? We had no idea going into it. We thought things were going to be so different. Yeah. I was always under the impression that if you got an IUD, then like the majority of people don't have a period ever. Mm-hmm. And I was surprised when I found out that wasn't the case, that like actually more people do have a period. So that's one myth I would say of an IUD. I know when I got mine, the process was pretty easy. I got mine at 6 weeks postpartum. The process was super, super easy. Nobody told me to take ibuprofen beforehand. So that's another one too. My provider didn't tell me that. So when I got there, she was like, oh, did you take your ibuprofen? And I was like, okay, nobody told me that. So that's another thing, that there is like, you can take some ibuprofen beforehand, which helps with the cramping before you get it placed. And then I think the other big thing is that I learned after I got it that it generally does take 3 to 4 months for your body to regulate itself hormone wise after you get it placed. So I was told to like not really put any emphasis really into like your bleeding for those first 3 or 4 months. Like it's going to be inconsistent. It's going to be random. It doesn't dictate what things are going to be like in a year from now. It's just it's 3 months that it takes. And
it's
then
annoying,
they told me, it's annoying. But they said that if you're getting to 6 months and like you're still bleeding on and off and it's not consistent, that's the kind of time that you would want to follow up with them and decide what exactly you want to do. For me, it was great. Like I got it placed. I had a period a week or two later, and then it got pretty consistent at that point, but I still do get periods. They're way, way lighter than they were, but it's still like 4 or 5 days of light bleeding. Like I don't need to, I can use a light tampon and that's like totally fine for all 5 days. I don't need anything more than that. But good. Yeah, IUDs are really, really great options for birth control if you're looking for something. But people do have different responses to it. Some people are totally fine with it and other people get symptomatic from it and like never goes away and they end up having to get it taken out.
Yeah. Like we have a friend she had that experience where she had one and she was having, bleeding for a really, really long time. And there are different kinds, not only like the copper IUD and then the hormonal IUDs, but there's a couple different brands of like the hormonal IUDs too. So just know that you do have options, if it's something that you want, if you want a long-term option like that.
Yep. Okay. Now that we've wrapped up the birth control plans, let's go into breastfeeding. So I want you to talk about kind of just the first 6 months maybe of breastfeeding. I know that Ryland, you guys discovered he had some allergies. So maybe talk about that first and how kind of all that went down.
Yeah. So Ryland, I've shared a bit about his allergies on my story, some, but not a whole lot. So when he was little and when I was still exclusively breastfeeding him, he like almost always had this weird face rash, and he would sometimes get rashes on his body. And I was convinced that it maybe was like a dairy thing. So I cut out dairy for a little bit and that didn't, really seem to help. And then what ended up happening was I went to the allergist with him when he was about 5 months old, I think, because it was right around the time that I started doing formula with him, but I hadn't like actually started yet. So he was about 5 months old and I took him to the allergist. And my personal history, I had a ton of allergies when I was a child, and I still am allergic to I'm allergic to pecans and walnuts, not anaphylaxis, but they make my mouth kind of itch. But those are the only foods that I still have allergies to. But I had a peanut allergy when I was a child, grew into it when I was 15 or 16, and then grew out of it when I was like 22 or 23. So really weird history. I could eat peanut butter and peanuts before that time when I was a little child, but when I was like a teenager, I had this weird reaction when I was like at this Chinese place and I was eating something and it had like peanuts in it, and I had a like anaphylaxis reaction. And I went to the allergist. They tested me, definitely was peanuts. And I had a couple instances after that where I'd eaten peanuts and reacted. So then eventually grew out of it. When I was like 22 or 23, I got retested and he was like, "You're fine," and have been able to eat peanuts since. Like, allergies are weird like that, where sometimes you can grow in and out of them. So anyways, I knew I had that history. So when Walter was born, when he was little, I talked to my pediatrician and I said, "Hey, I have this weird history of having a peanut allergy. He doesn't have eczema or he doesn't have any like other high risk symptoms of having a peanut allergy, but like, should I go to the allergist and get him tested for peanuts before I introduce peanuts to him? Because I know that peanuts are, it's that food that they say now to introduce at an earlier age." So my pediatrician said, "Yeah, go ahead and test him." So I tested Walter. He was negative. He's never had any sort of food allergies. So what you do with one kid, you have to do with the second one. So I took Ryland to the allergist at about 5 months old, and I did that same, it's just like a little skin test, and his came back positive. And so the allergist was like, "Oh, wow, interesting." So he was positive, to having like an allergy to peanuts. And so he said, "Well, we can try and do an oral test with him, because I guess when they're that little, you still can do an oral test with them and see if because I guess the skin test is one thing. But then the oral test, I don't know, for some reason, sometimes the skin test comes back negative." So he was like, "I think it's worth, doing an oral test with him." So anyways, still had this weird rash on his face when he was younger, when I was still breastfeeding him. So the allergist said at that point, since they had just tested him for peanuts, that, "Well, do you eat a lot of peanuts? Like, maybe it could be you're breastfeeding him and you're eating peanuts and he's, reacting that way." And I said, "I mean, kind of, but like not every day." So it's just kind of weird. So flash forward to maybe a month or so later when I'm starting solids with him, and I give him it was French toast like that I had made, or my dad actually made it because we were at my parents' house, and it was French toast. It had like, eggs. They were cooked eggs, but it was like very eggy kind of French toast. So gave it to him and he broke out like full on rashes, like didn't have any trouble breathing, but like his whole mouth was full of red splotches and his little body was all red. So I gave him, I called the pediatrician and gave him Benadryl. And so I took him back at that point to the allergist, and he still had this kind of red rash face thing too. That, wasn't really going away. And I was still breastfeeding him at this point. So he tested him for eggs and he said, "Yeah, he had the reaction with you. He has the skin test. He definitely has an egg allergy." And so then at about, I don't know when I completely stopped breastfeeding him, he was probably like 8-ish months old. And I noticed through that time period, like the rashes kind of thing started to go away. And I'm like, "Oh, I wonder if because I eat a fair amount of eggs and I eat a fair amount of stuff, just with eggs." So I'm like, "Oh, I bet it was eggs this whole time that he was getting, and now he's getting formula. The formula doesn't have any, any eggs in it." So yeah, so I guess that now transitions to the whole breastfeeding thing. But yeah, that was his allergies. The allergies. He's also allergic to kiwi. We had a kiwi episode a couple months ago. He was eating kiwi and he had the same sort of reaction. So he's just one of those kids that just has some food allergies. And I think he has, seasonal allergies. So I just kind of have to watch him. But yeah, do you want me to start talking about like my breastfeeding stuff now since I talked for 10 minutes about his allergies?
So I'm curious. I know when you first started supplementing with formula, he was how old? Like 4 or 5 months, right?
5 months. Yeah.
So, but you switched formulas, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
So what was the reasoning for that?
I still at this point thought that he was maybe like a milk kind of allergy. So okay. I started giving him, it was called Bobby, and I still, really liked that formula. The only thing that made me switch was like, they didn't have there's something called A2 formula. And it's just like a less, the formula mom, she could like explain it better than I can, but I think the proteins are just broken down in a different way. So they didn't have an A2 formula. So I was like, I'm thinking that he has a milk allergy. So I'm like, okay, let me try an A2 formula. But the Bobby was an organic, milk-based, formula. And so I switched to an A2. It's just like Gerber Good Start A2 formula. And he did okay with that. But also I was starting to give him more formula at this point than breastfeeding him. So I kind of think it was just more of that instead of like him being on, a milk-based one. And they're both milk-based, but like a fully milk-based one instead of like the A2 formula. So that's kind of the reason that I switched, that I thought that he had this like weird milk thing. And then he was doing so well with the A2 formula that I was just like, you know what? He's doing fine with this. I'm not going to go back to the Bobby. I think the Bobby's a great brand for anybody looking for like an FDA approved organic formula that's made. Because a lot of the organic formulas aren't made like, you have to get them. It's like a European based formula. So it's a great formula without palm oil. And, he did great with it, but I just switched because of that. And then I was using that, it's like the Gerber Good Start, yellow, can, and you can buy it in the store. So I was like, I'm just going to, stick with this. This has been working, well thus far.
So why don't you talk about your decision to start supplementing with formula at 5 months, and then kind of carrying into your breastfeeding journey, ending with him? Maybe you could just pull all that together.
Yeah. So at about 5 months, and I know I had a conversation with you at about that time, because I was just kind of feeling like I was, fighting him a whole lot. I talked about this in my story not too long ago, but when he was about 3 months old, he started just getting so distracted at 3 months, like just, fighting me. I remember so many nights trying to nurse him before bed, and he just didn't want to nurse. I don't know. He was just not the kind of baby, not like my first one that was really, really into the boob. Like he was, in a way that's good, that it's like, he was just all business. Like when he was nursing, it wasn't like very much a comfort thing for him. Sometimes it was, but it was stressful. So I'm feeling like, okay, this is starting to be a little bit more stressful than fun. And I'm not getting that like, it's hard to compare because I had struggles with Walter too, but they were just different sort of struggles. So really the main thing that made me start supplementing is I was yearning for that like stress-free experience that I had with Walter after he turned a year. And I was just, nursing him a few times a day. He was eating. I wasn't concerned about my milk supply. I was like yearning for that, but it's like, it wasn't the same issue that I was like having with Ryland. Like I was stressed out, not because of my milk supply, but I was like stressed out because I was fighting him and he was distracted and I just wasn't enjoying it. And I started pumping more too at that point because I was like, since he's distracted, it's a little bit easier to give him a bottle because I can just, give him a bottle and not like sit there and have to nurse him. So started pumping more. And I don't know if it's because I did so many darn pump reviews in the beginning and I just was kind of like over pumping at this point. But when you know what breastfeeding a baby is like, and you have that, like, I had that experience with Walter and I enjoyed breastfeeding him and I enjoyed breastfeeding Ryland. Let's be clear. I enjoyed breastfeeding my time breastfeeding with him in the beginning when he was not distracted and it was very easy. It was great in the beginning. So it's like when you have that and then you go to where you're trying to just pump for your baby, it's not the same. And I just was really over pumping and I was like trying to find this solution. And I'm like, you know what? I feel like I just need to give him, just one bottle a day. Let's just like start with that and see if that reduces my stress a little bit. And really it did. It was not, I didn't have any guilt over it. I like struggled with the fact of like, why am I not having guilt, which is like weird, but I didn't have any guilt like I did with Walter, seeing it as the enemy. I saw it as like my friend, like my helper, like you're helping Liesel out because I don't have to put a pump on. I can just like sit here and make this bottle of formula. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I started. And through that time, I think I started with maybe one bottle a day and then it just kind of transitioned into, my milk obviously decreased because I wasn't, feeding him as much. And I was okay with that because I knew that was going to happen. So it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm just not going to pump anymore. So I'm just going to stop pumping. So I'm just going to nurse him when it's not stressful for me. So that means like in the middle of the night, he's not, not fighting me at all. In the morning, he didn't fight me very much, but I'm only going to give him these bottles of formula when like I need to, and I'll nurse him, when I feel like I want to nurse him. So we did that for a while and that actually worked, fairly well. And then it still got to the point where I'm like working, full days and I'm away from him and I feel like I have to pump because I'm uncomfortable, but I'm like, I don't want to pump. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, it just it's not like, So yeah, it just kind of got to a point where he was about 8 months old and I can kind of remember the last time. I think I remember the last time that I fed him. And I remember thinking like, this is probably the last time I'm going to feed him. And I'm not, but breastfeed him. And I'm not super sad about it. I'm not like nostalgic, like, like I was with Walter. And yeah, it just kind of was like, hey, you know what? I realized that I wanted this stress-free experience of feeding my child. And the way that I was able to achieve that was fully formula feeding. And I sort of kind of realized that once I started giving him more and more formula and I started to be happier and happier. And I know we'll get into the postpartum anxiety thing too, because like that was happening all at the same time. So that somewhat had a lot to do with my happiness too and my stress level. But yeah, I watched some of my friends like we're still, I think Callan, because Callan's only a few months older than Ryland. So you were still, just formula feeding him. And so I'm like, that, what? I'm like searching for this perfect solution of, do I formula feed and just pump one time a day, or do I, formula feed and just like, and I couldn't figure out the happiest way for me to do all of it together. And I realized that what I was like trying to get was, I kind of just want to stop breastfeeding and I kind of just want to fully formula feed. Like that sounds really great. So yeah, it just kind of happened. And like I said, it was a guilt-free experience and like no regrets. I mean, it was great. With my first baby, things were hard in the newborn days. I seriously struggled and underestimated just how much went into caring for a baby in the very first 3 months. Honestly, why didn't anyone tell me to learn how to take care of my baby while I was pregnant? With our online class, Newborn Basics 101, you'll have the foundational knowledge you need to hit the ground running as a new parent and have an easier transition into motherhood. Head over to mommylabornurse.com/newbornbasics to learn more.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that, we tell this to our moms at the hospital and whatnot, that the mom and baby, it's different every single time. And, you go into your first baby with certain expectations, and then reality hits, and sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not when it comes to breastfeeding. But I think a lot of women go into a second time breastfeeding probably understanding that things are going to be different, but you need to go into it with realistic expectations that it's not going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
And even though your body is kind of the same, like nothing's probably dramatically changed with your breasts or your nipples, your baby is so different. And it's this dyad that it's just different with another one. So I think it's important for moms to recognize that and to try to not set the expectations too high, especially if you had a really successful breastfeeding journey with your first baby. And I think you went into it with pretty clear expectations. I know for sure that you wanted your supply to be really great, because that was the big issue with Walter.
Sure.
And you did a lot of things during pregnancy. And then within the first, couple of weeks and months afterwards, like just allowing him to cluster feed and feeding on demand. And you were eating your lactation cookies and brownies and all that kind of stuff. And then what happened? Your supply was really great and it was totally fine. And it's so interesting for me, because that was like the one thing that you wanted so badly with Walter, and you would have given anything to have that be better. And with Walter, you were totally fine nursing him for forever, like you were totally content with it. And how things change. And here, Ryland, you had this great supply. It's like what you always wanted. And then what happened? You didn't really want to do it anymore. And it's so interesting. And obviously your life was completely different having Walter, one baby, working at the hospital. You're kind of, not even into mommy labor nurse stuff yet at that point, to come to Ryland where you're still working at the hospital. You have a, 3.5-year-old, you have this successful business, things are just so different. But yeah, I think it's important to recognize how it's going to be different and be okay over it. Like the fact that you didn't have any guilt when you gave him his first bottle of formula is so fantastic. And like, that is where the world needs to go. And that's the direction that things need to head into, that there's never any guilt over one option over the other. You just go with the flow and take things how it is. And,
and
it's fine.
And realize that things are going to change. I think that's what I realized. And I'm glad that I realized that things were changing, and I wasn't letting myself feel guilty about that. Because really, when I had Ryland, my expectation for my breastfeeding experience was going to be that, I would just do breast milk. I didn't want to supplement with any formula, not because I saw it as the enemy, but I just, I supplemented with Walter. So I'm like, I'm going to try and have a great milk supply, because I didn't have a great milk supply with Walter. So that was my expectation, that I'm thinking like, okay, if I have a great milk supply, that is what's going to make me happy. But then I'm realizing as I'm going along and I'm feeding this different baby that I'm having these different issues, and oh, wow, I'm not actually happy, and my expectations are changing and my goals are changing. I think that, I think that's what a lot of moms struggle with, is that like your expectation goes one way and then like things kind of go a different way. And you have all these feelings that kind of merge together. Right. I think you said it great, that like, if you can, I don't even know how you said it, but you said it perfectly, how you can like, your expectations can go one way, and I mean, things are just going to change, right? Like
yeah.
you said,
And I think it's important that you recognize the change in your baby. This wasn't about you. I don't think that you made this decision because of you. Like, you also made it because of him. And that's important to recognize.
And I made it because of Walter too. I mean, there were a lot of times that I did not enjoy feeding Ryland because my baby was distracted. And in order to feed him and him have a successful feed, I would have to go into his room in a dark room and be by myself with him, which is fine sometimes, but a lot of the times I want to be around my other child. I don't want to just, close my other child off and go into a dark. I didn't want to do that. I pictured myself, feeding a baby that would always latch, and I'm sitting on the couch, like, talking to my other child or playing with my other child, or we're, all in the same space. And so then it turned into where Ryland was getting really distracted, and that just wasn't happening because I could not feed. If Walter was in the same room, Ryland would not, like, I don't care how hungry he was, he would not latch. Like, the child did not want to have anything to do with nursing and like looking at me and facing my body if his brother was in the room because he wanted to watch his brother. I mean, that's just how he was. So yeah, it got to a point where I felt like, well, geez, like, I'm having to go into this dark room. Yeah. Sometimes my husband's around and he can watch Walter and like they can hang out while I'm doing this. But a lot of the times I'm just by myself during the day, and I'm having to put Walter in front of the TV, which that's fine, whatever. But a lot of times he's 3.5 or he was 4, almost 4 at this point. And then it turned into he's coming into the room and disrupting, our feeding. And then Ryland's getting all distracted. And I would get all angry at Walter. And then I would feel guilty. About that, So yeah, I did it for me. I did it for Ryland. I did it for Walter. I even did it for Brian to like help, have him more involved in the process too. So yeah, definitely very, 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 very happy with my decision to start formula feeding. It's funny too, Tiffany. I don't think I even told you this, but like the other day, so he's on whole milk now, and transition to whole milk has been fine. But he's been drinking whole milk, and I threw away like that last can of formula, and I actually had a little bit of like, oh, oh, wow, cause this is my friend. Like, this helped me, you know what I mean? This guy helped me like when I was down, so
I
I'm like,
feel that way at all.
I know you didn't. You were like,
so
bye.
happy.
No, I got really emotional about like throwing that can of formula away because like this guy helped me out when I was down. And yeah,
That's so funny.
It's not like it was a whole can. I actually like sent a few whole cans to one of my followers who was formula feeding.
Okay, yeah, I did that too. I gave away some of
I gave away those,
too.
But like the one that was open that still had a little bit in, I had to just, kind of throw away. So yeah, I threw it away, and because I never had that experience with Walter too, because like I was still breastfeeding him past a year. So it was never that like, okay, we're throwing away.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even remember throwing away his formula can, but yeah, it was
do you think though do you think it was that, or maybe a combination too of like you guys aren't going to have any other kids and like this, like there is this finality to like bottles and formula that is very infant, baby related. So I feel like that probably
that also very much so. And yeah, just like a mark of this is the first year, and now this is just another sign that my baby's growing up, and yeah, we're not thinking we're going to have another baby. So yeah, probably all of that intertwined subconsciously. But I do remember very vividly thinking and having feelings over like, man, I'm sad to see you go because you helped me out so much.
Yeah, that's so funny. And like I said, so different than my, experience with it, where I could not wait to get that stuff out of my house. I was so excited to transition to milk, and like you just have to look at the cow's milk as your friend now. Like it's just,
yeah.
the cow's milk is a
we're
replacement for formula. And now you can just be friends with milk. So why don't you talk about that transition to cow's milk and kind of how that looked for Ryland?
You know what? This is going to be about a 1-minute spiel because it was so darn easy. I mean, it was so darn easy. I think I did half and half with him. No, you know what? I started with cause I thought he was going to have a little trouble, cause the kid is a little bit more picky than Walter was just in terms of eating and everything. So I thought he was going to have a little bit of trouble with it. So I think the first couple days I just did, he has little straw cups, little munchkin straw cups. And so I started just putting formula, in those just to get him used to a cup. And he did fine with that, took to that, no problem. So then I started doing a little bit of milk in there and mostly formula for a day or so. And then I did half and half for a few days. And then I just put whole milk in it one day and he didn't bat an eye. He just took it and it was okay, no big deal. I thought this was going to be this dramatic, bleh kind of thing.
Yeah, I think all kids are different with this. I mean, I've heard such a wide range of stories with this. My kids always did fine with it too. It was so easy, just
Walter
like Ryland.
Too.
But yeah, there's a couple different ways you can introduce cow's milk. I think most people probably, so first off, you're supposed to introduce cow's milk at a year. I know I started it a week or two beforehand because I wanted to slowly get them used to it. And I would just do replacement of 2 or 4 ounces of milk every day instead of formula. So I was slowly bumping up the amount of milk that was in there. And my kids are not picky, so they probably would have been fine if I would have just poured milk in there. But I was no, let's do it this way.
You also want to do it. Sometimes they can have constipation. And I did actually notice that with Ryland is the first couple days he was a little bit more constipated, but now he's fine, that he's his body's used to it.
Poop generally changes once you introduce cow's milk for sure. And some have constipation. Mine didn't. It was just the poop was different. It had just, it was just different and kind of had a different smell to it just for a little bit until they got used to it. So then also at this point, was he having any bottles throughout the day, or is he still taking any bottles now?
He's not taking any bottles during the day, but he still does get a bottle at night. And I wanted to talk to you about this because I've never had to wean a baby off of a bottle at night. So I'm how do I even do that?
So because I know we talked a couple months ago and you were how did you get your kids off of the bottle? I'm a big proponent of independency with my kids. So the sooner they can hold their cup themselves, the sooner they don't need a bottle. I was the sooner the better. So I just started replacing one of their bottles with a sippy cup of milk. I started with, I think by the time I started this around 8 or 9 months, they were having 4 bottles a day. So 7 a.m., 11 a.m., 3 p.m., 7 p.m. And I started with lunchtime first, I think. And I just replaced, because at this point we were already doing solids, they were already eating pretty well, more meals. And I just, no more bottle. Instead, we're going to pour your formula into a sippy cup and there you go. And they definitely didn't drink as much that way. So I made sure during this time that we were, doing more yogurt and cheese and things like that, just to kind of make up for it. So I did the lunchtime one, and then I did the after nap snack one. And then I did the breakfast one, which was pretty easy also for me because they were already eating breakfast by this point. And I just kind of based it on how they were doing with it. It wasn't one day I take one away and then tomorrow I take the other one away. It was weeks between when I would drop them. But the nighttime one was definitely, I wouldn't call it hard, but it was the last one that we did. I think I took the nighttime away around 11 months, a couple weeks before they both turned 1. And so the way that I did it is first, I slowly started to decrease the ounces that was in the bottle for that nighttime one. So if we normally would do 8 ounces, I would do 7 for a couple days and then 6. And I slowly decreased it that way. And then once we got to 4 or 5 ounces and they seemed fine, that they didn't care.
They're going to still sleep and
Correct. Once that was fine, I started pouring it into a sippy cup. And then I started giving them a sippy cup of formula. This is before we've transitioned to cow's milk.
Okay.
So I did a sippy cup of formula. And once again, like at this point, they're not drinking as much out of a sippy cup as they would a bottle. So they had that for, I don't know, a week or two. And like, then they just didn't like really care about it anymore, honestly. And one day we just like I just didn't give it to them. And sometimes Wyatt, I mean, he's almost 2.5. He'll still ask for some milk before bed, but like we put it in a sippy cup.
So does Walter.
To him if he wants
he still wants like a little cup of milk before bed.
Or sometimes Wyatt will have water. I mean, it just kind of depends.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just slowly decreased ounces and then I transitioned to a sippy cup. And then once I was in a sippy cup, they like lost interest, honestly. They just didn't care anymore about it. And then we just didn't have to do it anymore.
Okay. Well, good advice. Yeah. I did all of the same things in terms of the daytime and the morning time bottles. Like kind of what we did is like the 4 bottles a day. And then those 3 daytime bottles, we did all sippy cups. And now I kind of just replaced that 3rd afternoon bottle with like water and a snack, like when he wakes up, and then he still just gets a bottle, before he goes to bed. So it's like 2, kind of sippy cups a day, the water and the snack, and then like the bottle at bedtime. So so maybe I just kind of like put the milk, replace it back with the water and the snack, or do like you did and decrease the ounces. I mean, he's fine with, I just took him to the pediatrician yesterday for his 1 year, and I was talking to the pediatrician about it. And I was like, well, he still gets a bottle before bed. Like I know some pediatricians, he was like, it's not hurting anything. Like if you want to keep giving it to him, it's fine. If you don't, he was like, it's fine. I don't care about it. As long as he's growing on his growth, he's perfectly big and he's getting enough. So he's like, if he wants it, it's fine.
My pediatrician said, okay, recommendation is to be off of formula, off of a bottle by 12 months. So we had aims to kind of get there, but they didn't really ask about it until he was like 18 months. It was like his 18-month or 21-month checkup that I specifically remember there being a question, have you weaned off bottles? Like that question was not on his 12-month questionnaire, but it definitely was on the 18-month or 21-month or maybe even 24-month for Wyatt. I can't totally remember where it was like very specific. Are they weaned? Yes or no? And I think if I would have put no, he's not weaned, then they probably would have had a conversation about it. But yeah, that's kind of what I've heard too, is like, ideally get them off by 12 months, but like, it's not really a huge deal until like 18 to 24 months.
Yeah. And I think it's also like, they start getting those back teeth. So they don't want, like, if you're going to give them the bottle and then like brush their teeth, like, okay. But that's also a concern too, is like, they're getting this sweeter, like the lactose and then like sitting, you know what I mean? But then again, people, it's the same deal with breastfeeding. Like, so it's like, are you going to brush your kids' teeth after you breastfeed them? No, most people don't do that like before the night feed. So, I mean, if you're going to brush your kids' teeth, you do it before bed, but then you usually like still just breastfeed. So
how, kind of talking, I guess, on the same point, when you started to introduce solids to Ryland, why don't you talk through that and like how old he was, and did you do any kind of specific programming or anything with it?
Yeah, I went through a few things. I follow a few good accounts on Instagram, like Feeding Littles, and they're going to be on the podcast actually soon. Their episode's coming out. Feeding Littles, Solid Starts, Baby Led Wean Team, like all of these Instagram accounts I followed on baby led weaning. And so I had been really interested in doing baby led weaning with them. I didn't do baby led weaning with my first one with Walter, but I was just interested in doing it with my second one. And really the reason why I wanted to do it with my second one was because I have an older one and I wanted that experience of like not sitting there feeding them, like making my older kid's plate, making my plate, making Ryland's plate, and just us all, and Brian can eat too at the table if he's there. But I'm like talking about, breakfast or lunch, and us all kind of sitting there together instead of mom feeding, spoon feeding baby and then like trying to eat at the same time. Like that just didn't, like I wanted to try and avoid that if I could. Because I remember
not liking that with Walter, like, okay, this is, when I first started solids with Walter, it's like, oh, how many different, little purees can I, cause I was like all into making my own baby food and, at first, and then I got pouches afterwards, but like, I was all into, like mixing, I had a baby food maker and like, I had like the little mini, blender, and I would like freeze the stuff and like really into different flavors. And then it turns into like, oh, I have to like sit here and spoon feed him
give it to him.
And it's like just like annoying.
Consuming.
It's time consuming. Yeah. And then it's time consuming, like, pureeing, like making these like purees and storing them in my freezer and like, defrosting them and just like, it's a whole process. So I was like, I want to try and avoid that if I can, and just like feed him stuff that I already have in my house. And like, if I'm making something for dinner, like, can I just give it to him and just cut it up smaller? And then, it turns into, oh, that's what baby-led weaning is, So with him, when I first started with him, he was, he was about 6 months old, and he, we sat him in his little high chair. We had the little hook on high chair at first. So I started him in that, and he didn't sit great in that one. So I eventually got one of those IKEA, and I still have that little IKEA, high chair, and I got a little footrest for him, put him in that, and he did a little bit better with that. But my expectations were much too high in the beginning, because I'm thinking like, I'm going to put this food in front of him and he's going to be playing with it and like tasting it and blah, 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 blah. But like the first few days he was just like, what am I supposed to do? Yeah. So yeah, it was the first few days of like him just kind of being like, I'm not sure really what's going on. And then next few days, maybe next week is like, okay, he's starting to touch and maybe like kind of like put one thing in his mouth. And I'm, and now at this point I'm like, what you're supposed to like, what this is like, now this is stressful too, of like me being like, why isn't this working? So we, I tried a bunch of different things with him. I did avocado and sweet potato and banana. And finally, I think he did do banana. But I remember one of the very first things that he ate was like a waffle. Like I made some waffles for him, and he like, for whatever reason, like tore the darn waffles up and started, munching on them. And I just did the strips, so he could hold them really easy. And he's still, that's still really the main way that I cut his food, is still in little strips. Now that he's a little bit older, he still doesn't have his back teeth, but he has 8 teeth in the front. So he's really good at just, holding whatever it is, and just like biting and, kind of eating food that way. And so now that he's a little bit older though, too, he's got the better pincer grasp, so he can pick up, I'll give him Cheerios and stuff like that and cut stuff up a little bit smaller. But yeah, that's kind of how I started, of him just not being interested in it at all. And it took a while. I talked to, a couple experts on, it was the lady who does baby-led wean team. And one of the things that she said, and Feeding Littles said this too, is that those first couple months, especially those first few weeks or those first few days, like don't expect them to eat anything. And that's totally fine and expected. But really it can take like 8 months or 9 months is that age where they kind of start to like get it. And that's exactly what happened. When he was about 8 or 9 months old, he was starting to eat more himself. I think it's just, they just kind of have to learn how to do it. It's a learning process, how to feed yourself. So yeah.
And I think like you have to go into it with, like you said, not high expectations, and also a lot of flexibility with it too. And like, you don't have to stick to this rigid craziness.
No.
Like just because you start giving solids doesn't mean that now they're eating 3 meals a day,
No,
I remember
I
remember feeling really stressed with that with Wyatt, with my oldest one, of like, okay, I just don't want to do this once a day. He's not really even like liking it. So like, let's try to do it more, like I just remember feeling like pressured for some reason to like do more. And like, I don't know. So with Callan, it wasn't like that at all. I was like, whatever, I'm just going to give him stuff when I want to give him stuff. And I would say we did kind of a combo, baby-led weaning with pureed stuff. We would just like mix it up. But I think that makes sense what you were talking about with like low stress and whatnot too, and like time saving. And I think that's what's really great about baby-led weaning. If you haven't listened to one of the podcasts before, my kids are very, very close in age. They're 12 months and 10 days apart. So when I got to the point with my little guy that we were going to start solids, I was like, oh, okay, I can't wait till he can feed himself. Like I knew my life was going to be drastically different when he could feed himself. And even like him, like he could sort of feed himself, but like I knew he was not going to be successful feeding yogurt to himself or like oatmeal or something, because it's messy and I'm a clean freak and like I can't handle the messes.
That's one thing I hated about it. Even now, still, I hate the mess factor. I know it's important to let them get messy, but like, I know it makes me cringe.
I couldn't do it. And it's okay if you can't do that. Like I could not do it. So I still spoon feed him a lot of like really messy things that I know he can't eat on his own.
That is also, I'll say that
17 months old or something, 16 months old now.
I still do that too with like yogurt and stuff. You're right. Let's be very transparent and say like, I did not do that part of baby-led weaning and let them like with the spoon. Although here's the thing. What happens is Liesel mommy tries to feed Ryland with one spoon, and I have to give him another spoon because he wants to take the spoon out of my hand and do it himself because he's a very independent baby. So that's what it turned into, is like, it's still almost all, a mess. So, I'm trying still to like fight with him. So he has one spoon in his hand that he's trying to do it himself. And like mom's trying to at least get some yogurt into him. So we don't even do yogurt very much because
I know you got to get the yogurt pouches. That's what we do now. Siggy's has this brand of yogurt pouch and it's just like applesauce and it's so easy. So we don't do any like spoon yogurt anymore.
That's smart.
Yeah, you should. That's what you should try. That's way easier and not messy.
I will say too, I definitely do pouches like that. I know that that's not technically baby-led weaning. Even though they are pretty independent, like, sitting there and eating a pouch, but technically like that's not baby-led weaning. But we definitely, he loves a pouch. The kid he has a texture issue for sure. He very much prefers crunchy stuff over, he'll sometimes eat fruit, certain fruits, but Walter was like, anything you put in front of him, he'll try, he'll eat, he'll play with it. He'll do, like there was only a handful of things that I really couldn't give to him. Ryland, you put something new in front of him or something that I know that I've tried a billion times and he doesn't like he's not, I don't care how hungry he is. He's like, I'm not going to eat that. I want like something else that I actually like. That's just how he is. But he definitely has a texture issue. And it's weird because like my husband is like that too. He's very,
I was going to say, it sounds like his dad.
He's very, very picky in terms of like the types of foods that he eats and texture issues. I'm not at all, like I'll eat anything. That's how me and Walter, like I'm fine. But yeah, my husband's very, very like picky in terms of texture. So it must just be him taking it after Brian, like you said. But yeah, he likes crunchy stuff. He very much does pouches because he's not a big, like I've tried to do a various amount of vegetables with him and he's not a big fan of vegetables already at 1 year old. So I like that a pouch allows me to like get a little bit of like vegetable in him. So yeah, we definitely do pouches. I have no guilt over that either. Like I'll do a pouch all day. I'll do a pouch all day. They're so easy to take with you too. That's what I really like about pouches.
They're very convenient. We never really got into like pureed fruits and vegetable pouches for whatever reason. Like, I don't know why we never really got into that, but we do applesauce and yogurt and they love a pouch. Like at Ryland's birthday party, Wyatt walked into your pantry and found a infant baby food pouch and brought it over to me and was like, open this up, Mom, I want this. And then he ate it. And I was like, okay, so I guess.
I mean, I remember I was at your house and see, Ryland will now eat a pouch independently, like the whole thing. He can just sit there and eat it, but he still it takes him a good 5 or 6 minutes to like finish the whole thing. But I remember I was at your house one time and I was like, Tiffany can eat, because I had a applesauce pouch with me. I was like, he wants it. He's like, like wanting this pouch that I had. And you were like, yeah, that's fine. You can give it to him. And so I gave it to him and he was like,
I know.
Like he sucked it down in 5 seconds. I was like, I've never seen a baby do that before. It always takes us about 5 or 6 minutes to like eat.
My kids are pigs. You know this, but they're pigs. They like food a lot, just like mom and dad. They'll eat pretty much anything. And they're big, gigantic pigs, and they're big boys. You can tell by seeing that. Like they're tall and they've got some meat on them.
Yeah. That's good,
okay. Well, why don't we transition into another hot topic for baby sleep? Let's talk about Ryland's kind of sleep from, I don't know, 6 months on maybe.
Yeah. So Ryland, it's funny because I would describe him as it's weird because like he's a good sleeper sometimes, like during the day. He's a great napper. He loves napping for a long time during the day, but sometimes at night he has issues. And still to this day, especially if he's going through a little transition period, if he's going through a leap or a growth spurt or something, he will still wake up at night. Or wake up early in the morning. Like this morning, he woke up at 5:30. The past few days, he's been doing better, waking up at like 6 or 6:30. But this morning, he woke up at 5:30. So he's always been one that has never fully grasped like great, awesome, amazing sleep. So that was very hard on mom, of course. So when he was, about 6 months old, he was still getting up in the middle, and I was still nursing him at this point. So he was still getting up in the middle of the night, usually once, sometimes 2 times a night. And again, he would go through these leap kind of periods where it would be like he would get up a few times, like 2 or 3 times. And now I'm trying to even remember because I don't even remember. I think what he was doing for a while was like I was doing a dream feed, or he would wake up. I would do a dream feed at like 11 o'clock before I went to bed, 10 or 11 o'clock before I went to bed. And then it would get him to 2 or 3 in the morning. I would feed him, and then he would wake up, at 6 or so for the day. So that was kind of like what we were doing for a while. And then that wears on you just like anything would. And, I'm back to work now, of course, full time. And I'm just, exhausted, and I'm still nursing him at this point. So I'm still feeling like it's, fully on me, to kind of get up in the middle of the night. And I did somewhat enjoy that experience. Like I did enjoy going in there and feeding him in the middle of the night and breastfeeding him, because remember, I loved the experience of like just breastfeeding a baby and them not being distracted and them like liking nursing. So like that was one of the times when breastfeeding was not stressful and I could spend time with my baby because I was working a little bit more. So I felt like, even those 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes that I'm up there, I'm spending with my baby. So I had a like this pull of me of where I'm like, I'm tired during the day. I do really want to do something about his sleep and maybe because I'm like, he's older now. I feel like he could sleep during the, sleep through the night or sleep, longer than getting up at 11 and 2 a.m. But I'm like, I'm not really ready to do anything. I don't really know. But then it just got to the point where I'm like, I'm tired. I have to choose one or the other. So, and I think I will say the dream feed, it was tough because the dream feed we started, I don't even remember why I started that, but I started that. Maybe I just saw a post on it or something. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. I can get him a few more hours right before I go to bed.
All right, the sound of that baby crying means it's time for this week's segment of Birth It Up Babies. So this one, she just had her baby on July 28th, so only a couple weeks ago. So she says, had to share my birth story with you. I took your birth class, epidural class, and felt so prepared. So on July 28th, I was getting my nails done and felt a pop with a small amount of leaking. But I actually thought it was just drainage. Oops. So on July 29th, I called my OB in the morning and they had me come on in. Turned out I had a very slow leak and off to the OB ED I went. They hooked up my monitors and I had contractions but didn't really feel them. Soon after, my water broke and I filled the bed. That's when things really picked up. I started having really intense contractions and my husband was able to help me breathe through them and we tried different positions. There were no beds, so I had to labor in the stretcher, which was a really small ED room with a curtain. I finally got a room and my labor and delivery nurse was an angel sent from heaven. You guys are amazing. I knew my options and I opted for some pain medication first because I knew my options. However, I progressed super fast and my nurse said if I wanted an epidural, I needed it now. I barely got one because I was 9.5 centimeters by the time I got it. Wow. We labored down for a little while and then it was time to push. I had to push 3.5 hours and finally we decided to use the vacuum and have an episiotomy to get her out. But we are both healthy and well. Thank you so much for all the education you gave me. I don't think I would have handled that difficult labor without your course. You are the best. Also, the ragdoll image was clutch. My husband kept telling me to be like a ragdoll, which helped. Also, the relaxing the jaw. That is amazing. I'm so glad that I could help you. I know how beneficial it is to have some of those labor pain control techniques, even if you do plan on getting an epidural. That's why I include them in the epidural series. So I'm glad that they could help. If you want to check out the course that she took Birth It Up, the epidural series, and you can head on over to mommylabornurse.com to learn more. And now let's get right back into this week's episode.
So I started the dream feed, but then I think what happened is he started to depend on the dream feed and he would then wake up at 11 o'clock. Like it wasn't really a dream feed anymore. It was like a feeding, So what ended up happening was I started just doing it myself and I started pushing him, for that 11 o'clock when he was waking up, the 11 o'clock feeding, pushing it, trying to push it, further and further back and cutting out that feeding. And so eventually I got to where he wasn't waking up, but it was so stressful. It was so stressful to do the, letting him cry for a few minutes and then going up and doing the pat, that sort of thing, like the Ferber, method. And, so I did that. Very, very stressful. Then eventually I think like the 2 or 3 o'clock one, I tried myself to do that. And it was too exhausting. I think now it's like that whole time period. I'm just like, I don't even remember. It was just, you're so sleep deprived. And I'm like, you probably remember because I talked to you more about it than than anybody. But yeah, I got to the point of like where I tried to wean him from that one, but it was so stressful. And I was dealing with my postpartum anxiety was like sky high too. At this point, I hadn't started medicine. So it was like the baby crying sound would I would, not have a panic attack, but like almost have a nervous breakdown where I'm like hearing my baby crying. And I'm like, I know I really want to get sleep, and he was just a hard baby to very, very, what's the right word? Strong-willed, I guess, or just like, he would not go back to sleep. It was like really, really hard to sleep train him by myself. So what ended up happening was, Liesel did eventually get on medication. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit too, but Liesel got on some medication for her postpartum anxiety. And that just helped me like calm down in general. But I eventually reached out to a sleep consultant because I was just kind of at a loss. Her name's Larissa and I can't remember what her handle is right now, but I'll say it. But her name's Larissa. I found her on Instagram and I just reached out to her and I did a call with her and she really helped me more feel confident about what I was already doing and helped me make like small little changes, like small changes to his bedtime routine. And in the middle of the night, giving me a little bit more confidence of like, okay, if he, it's okay if he does cry for a few minutes, like this is kind of what they do. And if you don't, feel comfortable with things, like you don't have to do it right now. Like it was nice to talk to somebody who was certified and was like, you're not doing anything wrong. These are some things that you can do. Try them. If they work, great. If they don't work, like, let's reassess what's going on. And it really didn't take much time for him to kind of get the idea that he's supposed to be sleeping at night and not eating at night. Because what would happen is now, I tried to sleep train him myself. And then it got to a point where I'm like, I'm just going to go up there and feed him and give him a bottle. So yeah, it turned into, okay, how do we cut this nighttime bottle out? And he got the idea that now, okay, I'm supposed to be drinking my bottles during the day and I don't get a bottle at night. She explained it to me actually in a really great way of like, okay, if you woke up, in a bad mood in the middle of the night and someone handed you, because my concern was like, what if he's crying because he's like actually really hungry and he just really wants something so she was like, okay, if you woke up in the middle of the night and you were in a bad mood, you just woke up, you were grumpy, and someone handed you like a cookie, like a nice warm cookie, you love cookies, you would probably just like eat it, right? Like, even if you weren't like super crazy hungry, you would probably just eat it because it would make you feel better. And then, you could just go back to sleep. She was like, that's kind of how you have to look at the bottle, is like, he's getting food during the day and he's getting milk during the day. So he's probably not really hungry. He's just kind of wanting something to help him go back to sleep. And that's this cookie, AKA this bottle. So she helped me out a whole lot. It was like one simple little call. And then I texted her, a few times and got some additional help. But yeah, even to this day, like I said, he's good. Most of the time, but if he's going through a little growth spurt, or if he's having a tooth come in, he still does wake up in the middle of the night and, need mom. But I'm not like, thinking it's a problem, because I know that he's just, it's a little growth spurt that he's going to, he can do it. Right. So.
Yeah. I think that sleep training is like, I don't know, this thing of, you either hate it or you love it. And like, I don't know. I think a lot of people see it as this like really black or white thing with babies. And it's not. Yeah, it's so not. It's not like you shut the door at 7 p.m. and you leave. Now, there are some people that do that and find that method completely successful, where they just let them cry. But like, that's not what sleep training is. And I think it's so important that people recognize that it's really flexible, and you get to dictate what you do, and you get to dictate what you're comfortable with. I don't know if I would necessarily say that I did sleep training, but like, we did like a lot of subtle things just like from the start, almost like when both of my boys were even little newborns, we encouraged, independent sleep, and weren't always just like picking them up if they started crying. And we were always okay with that. But some people aren't okay with that, and that's completely fine. And I think that that's what, is nice about, because we talked about Ryland's sleep, because like, I have good sleepers. So I remember you calling me one night and saying, gosh, like, what should I do? He's 7-8 months old, and like, he's still not sleeping through the night, and I'm just exhausted and I just don't know what to do. And I gave you some ideas of things to try, which I think were probably pretty similar to what the sleep trainer did. Things that she said, but I think like something about hearing that from somebody who's certified and has gone through lots of training and like tons and tons of experience helped just solidify, like, it's okay. I can let him cry for a little bit. It doesn't mean that I have to walk out of the room and never go back in. I can just do 5 minutes. And then maybe next week I'll be comfortable with 10 minutes. And then maybe it's 15 minutes. But yeah, I hope that everybody will just take a step back with the whole sleep training and recognize that it doesn't have to be this like hardcore, tough thing for little babies, that it can be like a really gentle thing. And that's how I looked at it, as like, we just like did a really gentle sleep training, and it totally worked. And I would, if I had to guess, you're probably so glad that you did that, correct?
Yeah. So, 100%.
No regrets.
No regrets.
A little bit of crying was totally worth it, right?
Yes. Yes. I regret not doing it like sooner. Like not reaching out to her sooner and doing it. I mean, it's tough because like, I still felt that pull of, wanting to spend time with him in the middle of the night. But once I was getting a full night's sleep with him, I'm like, oh, I like wish I would have done this a little bit sooner. But that's not to say that that's everyone's plan. I'm not
for
saying
sure.
to you, if you're having issues now with your sleep, I'm not saying do it. Once you're done, you would have wished you'd done it sooner. Everybody kind of, and that's what Larissa told me too, is like, you just weren't ready. You have to be ready. So,
well, it's kind of like formula. Like you did it when you knew that it was starting to affect you, yourself, your baby, it's just like a person by person situation. And the one thing I would say too is like, I think you ran into this issue that you were like intimidated by sleep training, and you were like, oh my gosh, it just seems like so daunting to have to do that. Like, it's easier when your baby is 7 or 8 months old and you've just been going in with a bottle or going and nursing them. Like, it's easy. Like, easier
to get them back to
do
sleep.
that. I mean, I know it's exhausting to do that, but like, it's easier to do that. And it's kind of, it's daunting to think about, oh my gosh, I'm not going to just do the boob. Instead, I need to like try and do some other things and like be prepared that the first couple nights or first week, you're probably going to get less sleep, actually, sleep training than you would if you would have just gone in and given a bottle or nursed or whatever, because like, I know what you did was like, you go in and you shush them and pat their back and like try and jiggle them a little to get them to go back to sleep on their own instead of giving the bottle. But then what happens in 5 or 10 minutes if they start crying again? You go in and you shush them and you pat their butt and you jiggle them a little, like you're trying to do other things instead of giving the bottle. But all of those things take time, obviously. And I can remember when we were doing it with my boys, like, there would be some nights that I was just like, screw it. I don't even care. I'm so exhausted. I'm just giving him a bottle. Because I was just so tired. Like, I was just so tired after the third time going in. I was just like over it. And that's okay too. Like, I don't think that you're going to unravel all the progress that you made because you gave a bottle while you're sleep training in the mix of it all. Like, kids are so adaptable. They're quick learners. Just whatever feels right in that night, in that moment, like, is what you need to do.
Yeah. And that's what Larissa said too. And one thing that she told me too is like, okay, you can, because at this point, now I'm like, at this point, he still was doing, at this point, this is also the issue with him is like, he wouldn't wake up at the same time every night. Like, I couldn't count on, like, sometimes it would be like, okay, midnight, he would wake up. And then he would wake up at, 5:30. So it was like only, one wake up, then he would wake up early. Or like sometimes it would be at 10:30 and he would wake up at 3, or like sometimes it would just be at 3. It's like, I could never figure out what his schedule was. So that was an issue that I had too with him. And I talked to Larissa about that. And she was like, okay, one thing that you can do is like, you can set kind of a clock of like, okay, if he wakes up before midnight, like she was like, you can just start with doing one of the feedings a night, like cutting that out and doing sleep training with that one. She was like, if you want to try it, if he wakes up before midnight, you do it with that feeding. If he wakes up after midnight, then, we can try the next night. So you kind of have to look at it like that too. Like, you can split the nights in half and not go full force. And with her, I remember what I said to her. I was like, we're just going to do it. Like, I don't care. Let's just do it cold turkey and just do both. If he wakes up at 11, I'm going to try and sleep train him and get him back to sleep without a bottle at that point. If he wakes up at 3, we're going to do the same thing. Like, I'm so tired that I want to just do this and like try and get him sleeping through the night as quickly as possible. But you can do it, split, kind of split up the feedings like that too. If you have one, or more than one feeding a night that they still wake up, or more than one wake up. It's definitely not all, like you have to, you really don't have to do anything. Like, there's not one black and white way to get a baby to sleep.
I agree. I totally agree. Okay. So let's talk about your postpartum anxiety. I know you had some struggles with Walter. If you want to kind of touch on that quickly and then get into Ryland, because it was different. Like
it was,
they manifested so differently, and the timing was so different too. So
yeah, with Walter, I was very anxious with him, and control freaky with him, because I was always worried that he was going to die or something was going to happen to him. So I had anxiety with him. I had those feelings with him throughout his whole first year as he was getting older. There were some days were worse than others, and some time periods were worse than others. There were some days where I was like, I don't even want to really go this place because I'm worried that something's going to happen to him. But then there were other times when it's just like, I'm just anxious. I'm thinking, I'm having intrusive thoughts of him, running out into the street and like getting hit, or like, I remember with him, and still with Ryland, I would have these thoughts too of, I'm going up the stairs and like, what if I bump his head on the side of the wall and I have to take him to the emergency room, and then he has bleeding in his brain, like just kind of spirals.
Yeah.
Very, very spiraling thoughts. I would think about him falling, from my arms and hitting his head. And I remember I had this weird, and I've talked to my therapist about this too, I had this weird like thing with knives. Like if I was cutting something up, like, oh my God, what if I'm walking across the
that's me too. That's like my
like
thing.
I'm like, oh God, like what if I'm walking next to him and I slip and I stab him or something.
Belly.
Yes. Those are just intrusive thoughts. And I'm like thinking that this is like, these are scary, but this is normal. I'm like telling my therapist, I was like, I'm never going to I don't want to stab I'm not saying like, I'm not going to stab my children. It's not that, but I'm like thinking about like, oh my God, why am I thinking about like possibly stabbing my child, So yeah, it was a lot of those thoughts with Walter. I still very much had the intrusive thoughts with Ryland, but it was very different with Ryland. With Walter, very anxious all the time. And eventually he just he got older and there was really just less to worry about. Thankfully with Walter, he was a very early talker, and we were very, very much in sync early on, and he could communicate with me very well, like what he wanted from a very early age. So with Ryland, it's actually like he's getting better with saying things and doing more and doing, but sometimes I'm still with him like, what the heck do you want? Like he's definitely not as good as Walter was. So yeah, Walter just got older to where I could communicate with him more. I knew what he wanted, because it was this constant fear of like, what do you want? Like, it's like, oh, like, are you hungry? I don't know. Or like, are you tired? I don't know. And just like all of this really weird, all of these like really weird anxieties. Even now I'm talking, I'm like getting like anxious thinking about that time period in my life. So with him, it was like that, always kind of on edge. And I never was really, it didn't manifest as anger very much. I always very, very much enjoyed my time with him, even though I had anxiety and I was thinking about these things, but I very, very much enjoyed being his mom and doing things with him. So yeah, I never went on medication for it. I never talked to a therapist about it. It just kind of eventually, got manageable, and he got older and there was less to worry about. And, symptoms just kind of like got better. I never really had any physical symptoms. I never had too much trouble sleeping. I kind of had some trouble sleeping because sometimes I had a lot of issues with him. And I still do with Ryland sometimes. We're thinking that they're just going to like die in the middle of so I'm like, I do like the checking on him all the time because I'm worried that they're just going to die in the middle of the night and there's nothing I can do about it. It's a big control thing. Okay. So with Ryland, it was very, very different. And I've even talked to my therapist about this too, I definitely know that this was anxiety, but I think it was a little bit of postpartum depression too, because it was like, there were times with him where I would I would have trouble sleeping because my brain was so like wired all of the time. And it's hard for me to even like I'll start talking about this and remember stuff, but this time period in my life with Ryland was so abnormal and out of whack of like how I normally am that it's crazy to me to even think about some of the things that I was doing or some of the things that I was thinking because it was so like just weird for me. So it got to the point where he was about 4 or 5 months old and I was back at work and I was back doing mommy labor nurse stuff kind of full time. And I remember saying to my therapist, like, I'm doing okay, but I'm always on edge. I'm always yelling at like anything will set me off, like just anything. And I'm like, I feel like I just can't control my emotions. They're kind of all over the place. But I was like, but I'm not thinking about like hurting myself. I'm not like thinking about hurting my children. I'm not like, like I'm like, I'm doing okay. Like, I know mom life is hard. Like I see all these, people out there that I follow and just, you're talking about how like, sometimes your kids are just kids and like mom. And so I'm like, this just feels normal. But it was still really, really hard. So yeah, it got to the point where I just was always on edge and I was just yelling all the time at Walter. It was something, every morning was hard to get him out the door for preschool or just mornings were hard. Even if we didn't have anywhere to go, I just always felt tense. And I felt like I wasn't enjoying my time with my children like I could be. It got to the point where it almost manifested as like OCD type symptoms too, where I would get so overwhelmed with life and tasks to do. And I saw all of my life as like little individual tasks. Okay. And I talked about this in a previous podcast episode, but I would be, in my room and we lived at the old house at this point, at this time, but I would be in my room and I would scan the room and, I would hear Ryland crying in the background. So I'm like, I know I have to go tend to him. Walter is trying to talk to me. I have to, tend to him. I feel that I have to go to the bathroom. Like I have to pee. I have to do that. Okay. I see something on my desk that it's like a bill that I have to pay. I'm like, oh, I forgot I have to do that. And then I will look and there's something on the floor like that needs to be picked up. It's a shirt that I left. Oh, I have to do that task. And then I'll look, over to, the unmade bed and I'll see that task has to be done. And then it's like, it turned into literally like hundreds of things that I would look at. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much stuff that I have to, and it would just be overwhelming to the point of like, I feel like I can't even stop and go to the bathroom and like go use the restroom because that's a task that I have to do. And I have to pay my bill. I have to make the bed. I have to, Walter's asking me something. Ryland needs something over here. I'm hungry, oh, I can't eat. So it's like, it got to where I had days like that. And then, Brian would come home and ask me something that was normal. Like, hey, what are we doing for dinner? I'll be like, what do you mean? What are we doing? And I would like go off because I was just always on edge. So yeah, I had days like that for a while and it got really, really bad. And it got to the point where we were in a counseling session, me and Brian together, because we've been going to marriage counseling for a while. I've been open about this, but we were in a marriage counseling session and Brian brought this stuff up and the marriage counselor said, Liesel, like, that is not normal. Like, that is not normal behavior. Like, I think this is kind of turning into something that you can't manage anymore. I know you've kind of been resistant to going on medication for a while now. Cause I have, I've always been like, I'm seeing a therapist. Like I see my own individual therapist. I'm in therapy. I'm fine. I don't need any medication. So she was like, maybe you just need, have you ever thought about, maybe you don't need to go on it for your whole life, but sometimes we are in these periods of life and we need something that, is a medicine that you take, and it's not something like, because I, I have certain things that I know help my anxiety. Like when I'm exercising, I'm much better. My symptoms are much, much better. When I'm, eating a lot healthier, my symptoms are much better. When I'm able to go outside, I even have like seasonal, when it's weather's outside, I can go outside and get some sunlight. Like it's a lot better. But it got to the point where it's like, I feel so overwhelmed that I can't do the things that I know help me. So she was like, that's kind of when you need some medication, because then it allows you to do all of the other things that you already have in your toolbox that help you. So I was like, okay, like still not even at this point being like, yes, I have a problem, but just being like, yeah, I guess I'll give this a try. So I know I texted you at that point. I texted like the group at that point of like all of us at Mommy Labor Nurse. And so I went on medication, and it took it got worse before it got better. I mean, I definitely had a few days after that where it was hell. I mean, it was like, I still had those days where I felt overwhelmed to the point where it's like, I feel like I can't even, I'm sitting there trying to text you about something, and I'm like, I feel like I can't even text you right now. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm completely out of control. It was like, I remember after I started medication, there was a time when I was in the shower and I'm like trying to talk to myself and tell myself, okay, pick up the shampoo, put the shampoo in your hand, shampoo your hair. Okay. Rinse it out. It's like, it's so, and now I'm thinking about myself doing that stuff. I'm like, that sounds so crazy. Like that sound not crazy in terms of like, if somebody's, I mean, that's normal behavior for someone who has an issue with anxiety or depression. So it's not you being crazy if you are relating to this, to what I'm saying. But now feeling the way I feel on medication, now almost 6 months of being on medication, like, oh my gosh, that sounds miserable. Like, how was I even like functioning or like making content for Mommy Labor Nurse, or like, what? So yeah, medication was my saving grace. I just saw my doctor yesterday. I see the same doctor actually that Ryland sees. He's like a family doctor. So I saw him and I talked about our medicine regimen, and I was like, is this sort of thing that, you want me to wean off at any point, or like, what is kind of the future look like? And he was like, well, do you feel like your symptoms are hormonally based? And I was like, well, I mean, I do feel like during pregnancy and postpartum, yes, that's kind of when they've been peaking, but I'm like, I've had issues with anxiety and depression my whole life. So I don't know if this is a hormonal thing or if it's just a chemical imbalance that I just have. And he was like, well, let's give it another 6 months at least to kind of see. And if you feel like you want to try and wean off of it and see if you can manage your symptoms, with your things that help, then fine. But he's like, it's really up to you. It's fine. You can take it for as long as you want to take it. Or we can try and wean off. It's totally fine. So yeah, at this point, I really don't have any plans of weaning off. I feel great. I feel like I mean, stuff still pisses me off sometimes. I mean, kids are kids, right? Like sometimes Walter does something and I'm like, but it's definitely not that feeling where I'm constantly overwhelmed and I'm constantly like, oh my gosh, feeling that way. I mean, that was so crazy to me to feel that way and to think that was just mom life, like that was just, no. Like,
I think some people like they can't tell when it's more than normal. Yeah. Right. And I think sometimes it takes like an outside perspective to come in and say, this isn't normal, or you seem off, or whatever else. And I mean, this happened in, what was it, February, maybe? Early February, I think.
Yeah, it was
February.
Peaking. It was peaking in February because I remember it was like around Walter's birthday, because there was an issue with like his birthday of me forgetting the time of him going. Remember that? I talked to you about that. I had planned his birthday party and I had told it was at my in-laws house, and I had told my in-laws different time than I had told a couple other people. So like people would come over early. And so my mother-in-law, I mean, she wasn't mad. She was just like, this
Confused,
happened.
like
And
what's
so I
happening?
was just like, oh my, I mean, when I realized that I had made that mistake, I was just like, I took it so like,
Yeah.
oh my God. Well, I'm like, I want to start crying right there, but I didn't, I'm like all spiraling later. Like, I can't believe I did that. Blah, 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 so yeah, it was, and that was before I started medication. So it was probably peaking around that time, January, February. And then I think I started later kind of February.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously remember that time because we talked about it a lot. And I, I think I probably, even as like your friend and somebody that I talk to every day, like knew that something was wrong, but didn't know the extent of how it was, and yeah, it's interesting even now to look back on me, like reflecting on how you were, and it's just so different. Like
Yeah.
it was affecting every single aspect of your life. Like
Yeah.
you as a mom, you as a wife, you as a business owner, you
At the
working. I mean, it was
hospital.
just, yeah, it was like every single piece of it was being so affected. And I think that that's really like the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like all moms feel anxious, all moms feel guilt, all moms feel overwhelmed. Like these are normal things. But when it's starting to affect your daily life, your relationships, your work, like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't even have to be drastically affecting it, just affecting it. Like
Yeah.
20% of the time, if at work you used to be this way and now you're this way, like, okay, time to talk to somebody. And it doesn't mean medication. For you, it meant
Right.
medication because it got so overwhelming and it was affecting it so, so much. But for a lot of people, it's just talk therapy,
Mm-hmm.
or exercising more, eating better, or whatever else. But yeah, it's a lot. Like it's a lot to handle. And asking for help is oftentimes the hardest part. That first, for you were going to therapy beforehand. So like that, that wasn't difficult because you're already doing that. But yeah, it's a lot. And I do think that it oftentimes gets worse before it gets better because
Yeah.
by the time that you're ready to take initiative and do something about it, you can admit that there's a problem, right? Like you're not going to get help unless you have now said, there's a problem, I have a problem, I need help. And once you are aware of that, all you want is to get help and to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Because before this time, you are just, not that you're clueless, but you haven't yet recognized that there's a problem yet. So you're just feeling overwhelmed. Like there's not this like internal factor of awareness to it. But once there is, that's all you want. And medication doesn't work after one day. Most
Nope.
anti-anxiety, antidepressants take weeks, like 3 to 4 weeks to even get to a point where it's sort of helping. And a lot of people still need dose adjustments at that point. And some people, it's a guessing game of what's going to work best. And it's a little bit of trial and error of trying different medications, different dosages. So like, it's really hard, those 3 to 4 weeks between I have a problem, I want help now, but I can't get help now because this medication needs time to kick in. So I remember that time and you being like, oh my gosh, I don't feel better. And during that time, you ended up adjusting your medication. Like I think after 2 weeks or something, you increased your dose because it wasn't, it was getting worse and not getting better. But yeah, I think that it's important for people to recognize that like it's hard and it does oftentimes get worse before it gets better. But just know that I think there are things that you can do immediately. Like, yeah, okay, you might need to wait 3 or 4 weeks for your medication to kick in, or you might not be able to get in to see the therapist right away. But like exercise usually helps. And that's something a lot of people can do immediately, even if it is just a walk around the street. And I know that that's like the last thing that a lot of people want to do, but like it will help. Or just talking to a friend. Like, once again, you might not be able to go see a professional about it, but talking to a friend who's been through, something can help a lot too. So it's about finding those little things that you can do to get you through that hump and like over the bridge to, feeling better. And just like not being ashamed by it. I can't tell you how many friends Liesel and I have that are on medication. Like,
yeah.
an unbelievable amount of them,
It's hard
75% of
being a
our
mom
friends
these
that are
days.
moms
Like, yeah.
are on some kind of medication. And like, not that it's normal. I mean, obviously, if you can get through and feel better without medication, like I never went on medication. I'm still not on it this day, but I went to therapy instead.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's about finding what works for you and recognizing that you're not alone. And there are so many other people. It's still just this taboo thing and like
It is.
needs
It's
to be
sad, but
talked
it
about
is.
more. And I think a lot of things are changing when it comes to mental health regarding, pre and postnatal periods, but like still so much needs to change with it all.
Yeah, totally. I know it's tricky too because it's not like I remember at my 6-week visit, you do like your normal depression, scale. And I was even in Pebble's complete care program and seeing someone, every week. And I was fine up until I was done with that program. But it's like the lack of not seeing a provider and not having those check-ins now too for a lot of people of like, okay, I have this 6-week appointment and yeah, maybe I am having symptoms and it gets caught then. But I think for a vast majority of people, at least I know Tanya told me this, that she has a lot of patients that it's like, it hits at that 3 or 4 month mark when in the United States here, you go back to work and things are starting to go back to normal. And, your baby's a little bit, that 4-month sleep regression like hits, like all of these kind of things. And your symptoms start at that point. And you don't have any sort of 4-month visit with any, a provider or something. So like, how does it get caught? It doesn't. And then people go on and have these symptoms for months and months and months. I mean, I know a lot of people who I follow on Instagram or I know in real life that it's like they have symptoms for months and then they eventually get help when their babies are like 11 or 12 months old. But it's like, geez, that is a
Like
long
so much time. I know, it's so sad, right?
It
Like
is.
my symptoms hit with Wyatt when he was 7 or 8 weeks old, I think. And I just remember then hearing stories from other people afterwards of like 10 months, 12 months after their babies were born. And I felt this way and this way. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. Like I thought I was going to die until I got in to see the therapist, for those first couple of days. Like I could barely move. I'm like, I can't imagine moms out there that are going through this for longer. And yeah, it's one of those things. I think there is some self-awareness that needs to come to it, but I also think it's about educating your support people around you and your partner about signs and symptoms too, because I didn't realize that what was happening until Liesel said something to me about like, you might have postpartum depression. And even me, I was like, no way. Like, that's not me. I mean, so stupid now that I think about it, but like my husband wasn't really attuned to what that was. And that's actually one of the things that we put into our birth courses is like, make sure your partner reads this. Like, make sure your support person reads these things because they're oftentimes the ones that are picking up on it. And like, it's really, really, really hard for a mom to be self-aware of what's going on and know what's normal and what's not normal and like make that decision herself a lot of times.
It's so hard. I know. Even someone like me who you think I preached this kind of stuff, but I still had symptoms and I still wasn't self-aware. I still needed my husband to say it to my face and my marriage counselor to say it to my face, say, hey, I think something's going on, Liesel. Like, and then I'm texting you guys and you're like, oh yeah, that does. Yeah. So it's, yes. I mean, it is very, very, very hard to be self-aware when you're so engulfed in it,
Yeah, I know. Well, let's wrap up this episode with a little talk about introducing, second baby into the family, how was that adjustment? How has the last year been? I know we kind of talked about this at your 6-week follow-up that we did last year, but how has the last 6 months really been as far as having a 4.5-year-old now and a 1-year-old?
Yeah. Honestly, this is my perfect, now that I'm on my medication, and we're moved into our house now. This is my perfect, and we have childcare figured out. That was a big struggle too. And I didn't even like go into that on this podcast episode, but like figuring out what our childcare looks like. And now that I feel like I've kind of found my village that we talk about that it takes to like raise children. I feel like 2 is my perfect level of busy, and I'm able to keep up with their schedules, and I feel like I'm able to devote time with both of my children. And I really, really enjoy having 2 children because I love seeing the interaction between my little one and my older one, even more now as he's getting older and Ryland's interacting more with like toys that Walter's playing with, and Walter can, they just, as they get older, they just play better together. So yeah, it's been a journey though, figuring out childcare and figuring out schedules and figuring out, how to still have time for myself too, and my marriage. And, I mean, it's not easy. Like I wouldn't say, I'm trying to think, like I've always said 0 to 1 is the hardest transition for me, at least it was. But I mean, 1 to 2 is not a walk in the park. There's still a lot of issues that arose. And I mean, it's just a different level of busy. And I feel like we're really starting to get into our, like the pathway that our life is going to be now as my children get older. And, I thankfully, Walter and Ryland, they fight a little bit about toys now that Ryland's starting to get older and like take things from Walter. Walter's a little bit like, but for the most part, they don't fight and they love each other. And that's not stressful because I'm not dealing with children that fight, which I know that could change like in a second. Like they could start to be like fighting with each other at once they get older. But they love each other, and that's so sweet. And yeah, I'm really genuinely enjoying being their mom and having my sister come over twice a week to help. My little one goes to my mom's house twice a week, and I work from home pretty much during the week unless I'm at the hospital. I usually go there on the weekends. I feel like we've kind of found, our routine for now, but I know how parenting is, and I know how life is, and life changes, and schedules change. But yeah, I feel like I'm happy, and I feel like I'm happy parenting, my kiddos. And I feel like I've made it through the hump. I mean,
yeah,
knock on wood, like I feel like I've made it through that stressful part of parenting when they're little. And at least it was for me, but
yeah, no, I think that the first year, getting through that first year is the hardest because there's like so many different little, like we talked about this earlier. I just remember when my little one was like last year, newborn and whatnot, I kept like, I hated that I was wishing his life away, but I just knew that things were going to get better. So like, okay, once he sleeps through the night, things will get better. But then once that happened, I was like, okay, well now I can't wait till he feeds himself on his own, then that will get better. And then it was, it was just like always something. But once he turned 1, I don't know, like really once he started walking, I would say, which I know Ryland isn't like walking yet.
But he's getting there. But
once Callan started walking, like I couldn't wait for him to start walking. I know a lot of people don't feel that way, but like our house is already baby proofed. Like, I couldn't wait for him to be able to walk around and like be more independent. So like, once I got to that first year and him walking, because he started walking a couple of days after he turned 1, I was like, like, I felt like I could take a deep breath, and I was like, man, we made it. Like, I really felt like we made it. And then, but like you said, something always changes. So what changed? Like, we started potty training Wyatt a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, dude, this blows. Like, this is, I thought we made it already. So yeah, it's funny how you like you think that you're like over the finish line, but then something else changes. And obviously that's what parenting is. But I would say, like, overall, big picture, things are so much easier now than they were a year ago. And like, I can remember a year ago when I had a 3-month-old and a 15-month-old thinking, I can't wait till this time next year. Like, or just I would imagine myself a year from now, which is now, right? Like, and thinking that's going to be good times. Like, things are going to be so much better. And it's crazy that we're a year now. And like, we've both been through all that.
Do you feel that way now still? Like, you're looking forward to a year from now when Wyatt is fully potty trained and like,
not as much as I did through the baby days, but I didn't like the baby days. Like, I didn't like the newborn days. I'm much more of a 9-month baby forward kind of person.
That is
which I know a lot of people, a lot of people aren't like that, but I'm like that. And even now that Wyatt's almost 2.5, I enjoy this stage so much more than I even did like 9 months to 15 months. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's maybe because there's not as many like milestones now. Like, the milestones seem so big and gigantic when you've got a newborn. Like, okay, sleeping through the night, giving solids, crawling, walking. Like, it was all these like sitting up, all these big things. And now that they're past that, like, it's different. Like, now the milestones are like combining 2 words together and speaking more and throwing a ball. Like, it's just different stuff that doesn't take my mental and physical energy to have them hitting these milestones, which I think is why potty training set me back a little bit, because it has taken a lot of physical and mental energy for us to do that. And not saying I don't look forward to it. Like now I'm dreading having to potty train Callan, because I'm like, oh, this sucks. Like, I don't want to have to do this. And like, I look forward to a year from now, just because like it's going to be easier for us to like go to the park with just me. Like, right now it's still a lot for me to take the boys to the park by myself, or like to a splash pad or to the museum. Like, those things I don't really do that much because it's exhausting. But I'm like, oh, in a year from now, it's going to be so much easier and we'll be able to do more stuff. So like, I in that element, I look forward to that, but it's not the dread anymore. And it's not the wishing my life away. Like, I feel like I'm finally into a point of like enjoying the day to day so much more, and like appreciating the day to day and trying to just, not wish all this time away. It's just so much happier and balanced. And like, I feel the same way. Like, we're in our groove. We got through the worst of it. I mean, I know there's still going to be tough times to come, but like, it's not day to day. When you've got a baby less than a year old, it's like every day you're in the thick of it. Now we're like, maybe once a week we have a day that's a little rougher, or we have like an hour a day that's a little rougher than the other one. It's not like constant. It's so much more manageable.
And I think too, I'm able to devote a lot more time to like myself too. So like, that makes a huge difference too. When your kids are a little bit older and you're just able to, I wish, I mean, it's tough because like, I do preach that still of like, make sure you make time for, like, I don't care what it is, but like, make sure you make time for yourself. But it's so hard when your kids are little like that, when you have a baby, to really, really make time for yourself. But yeah, I agree. I think we're in our groove. I'm ready for Ryland to be walking too. I agree. Like, that's the last kind of step that I'm like waiting for him to like start walking. But he's like a little spider monkey. Like, he's real good at crawling. But you know what, Tiffany, the thing too that I'm excited too about is, I remember with Walter always thinking, every stage that he got to, thinking, wow, this age is so much more fun than this age was. And like, I never really was like, oh, I hate 3. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. 3 was a little bit hard, but there was never really like oh, like this is just, it's getting worse when is it going to get better? Like even at 4.5 now, like, I mean, Walter will say some things that just make us laugh so hard. And I mean, he even is at the, like the other day, he has these little bug stickers and he stuck one on the wall, and like mommy hates bugs. Let's be clear. Mommy hates bugs. He stuck one on the wall, and I was like sitting on the couch. My sister, it was yesterday, we were home. And he stuck one on the wall, and he came over and he was like, Mom, there's a bug on the wall. There's a bug. Come get it. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I don't want to get it. I want to see it. And so like I walk over, and like me and my sister both saw it, and we're like, and then he's like, ha ha, 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 I put the bug on the wall. It's not a real bug. I was like, did you just like play a little trick on me?
I'm not looking forward to that.
So it's like, it's just fun. No, but you will.
I hate bugs too. I know.
It will be fun. Maybe it's not that, but it's like just little moments like that where you're like, man, I can't wait till like Ryland's pulling this kind of stuff and they're both together. And like, man, what is 5 going to be like? What is 6 going to be like? What is 7 going to be like? What is this going to be like? You know, he's going to start kindergarten next year. What's that? It's so much fun to continue to parent these children. And yeah, in a way, it makes me sad that we're, you know, probably done with having another baby. And I think that's probably why people continue to have kids, because it's like, yeah, you just want to like, it gets to the point where you're like, okay, this is fun. Yeah. Let's just start over again. Let's fun.
I know. I found myself feeling that way. Like Liesel and I have talked a lot about whether we're going to have another kid or whatnot, because we both have 2 boys. And some days we're like, yeah. And then other days you're like, heck no, that's not happening. And yeah, like, I don't know. I'm sure that it'll all straighten itself out, you know, in the end of whether it's supposed to happen or it's not going to happen or whatever else. But I'm the same way, that I'm just relaxing in this moment and soaking it in and enjoying it all. And, you know, because it might be the last time. And it's hard to remember that when you're in the thick of it, when you've got a little baby that's not sleeping through the night. But now that there's so much, you know, they're older and whatnot, I'm like, oh man, just enjoy these moments. You're going to blink. I was watching a show last night where like the older son was graduating from college or something, or high school. I don't want to think about that. I literally teared up, and I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to be here before I know it? I mean, we're like 16 years away from that, but it's still, it catches you sometimes in very unexpected ways.
Yeah. Well, sorry to end the podcast, guys, on a sad note. But I feel like this is a good way to end.
Bittersweet.
Yes. Bittersweet. Very bittersweet. So maybe we'll name the podcast episode that like Liesel's 1 year update, bittersweet something. I don't know. But all right, Tiffany, well, thanks so much for joining me today. This was fun. This hour and a half or something that we've been talking about my life. So thank you. All right, guys, that wraps up this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and letting me be a part of your motherhood journey. It is truly an honor. If you like what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And I love hearing what you guys think of the podcast. So if you're liking what you hear or you have a suggestion, I'd be so grateful if you'd go ahead and leave me a review wherever you're listening to help more mamas just like you find the show. What do you think? Are you starting to feel a little more confident about your pregnancy and birth? Well, if you want more, be sure to head on over to mommylabornurse.com/podcast for today's show notes and a library of episodes so you can keep getting educated before your upcoming birth. And while you're over there, be sure to check out the blog and learn about our online birth classes. Find it all and more over at mommylabornurse.com/podcast. See you next week, same time, same place.